Grundtvig, as a politician, a Danish author and writer, and the key to understanding the Danish mentality and identity in many ways. Big, really big figure from that time, and an important person for the later understanding of Denmark in its many aspects. And now we're going to look and focus on him as a politician. There's a lot to be said there, but this lecturer Anders Holm has made it easy in his book to look into and to relate to by giving us the essence of it. And out of that essence, I would like to give a small picture of what he was really trying to achieve. He says that freedom is good for a lot, and slavery is good for nothing in the world of spirits. That's why we would prefer freedom with all its dangers. That's from some of the speeches of 1849, where the constitution were agreed upon in Denmark, and that's a very important date in the Danish history, that the king gave allowance and place for the people to come with their voice in the parliament and to have part of the rule that has been up until then only in the hands of the monarch. And so how did Grundtvig look at all that? He was, of course, the conservative priest and the Dane who looked into history, and he could see that, well, the best and ideal form of government for Denmark would be that where there is this one-man rule, the king, who has the power, with the voice of the people that is listened to. So he would like to have a combination. He saw that as a historic way of doing things in the Nordic mythology, where you had Odin as this all-deciding god, but was listening to the people around him and to those in his favor. And so, in the same way, there should be this establishment of the kingdom that should stay, and the people who had a voice in it. At the same time, he really took big steps, saying that without freedom to believe and freedom to speak, there is no meaning of having what you have. And he have this quotes here about it, saying very clearly that the one who would like to be free must give the next the same ability with him. That's from his 1838 lecture on man's memory. And he says, experience teaches us that the persecution of religion, religious persecution, does not minimize but form the disagreement in a country. And he has this text about religious persecution from 1842, where he says that. And he has also a protest over the slavery in the West Indies islands that belonged to Denmark for some time. And he said, well, in the name of the friend of humans, I must protest against owing another human being. And so he had this idea that was bold and strong, and he could see the importance of freedom of speech, and he had this citizen freedom that he wanted to achieve alongside many others, of course, but he wasn't against it. He said that there must be the right to speak and express yourself in writing and in speech, your right to also trade, and your right to follow your own conscience. That's the same for the priest. People should be given the freedom to choose the priest and the parish and the place they want to belong to. They shouldn't be forced into a place like that if they don't want. And he didn't like that kind of suppression, as we talked about under his mentioning of the schools earlier, that, well, he could see that it will lead to a kind of hypocrisy and a shallow way of just following the rules because somebody is pulling them up over your head, but you won't be yourself in those rules. And so for him, it is very important that people could have, especially the freedom of religious and speech. And he defended the Baptists, and he defended the Jewish minority in that perspective, saying that, well, they should have the right to do so. And he had you faced all that when he got censored in 1820s, and they almost 10 years not being able to say his mind and speak up. And so he could see how it is being pushed out of like what is given to humans, the ability to argument and speak and so on. And there were a lot of religious groups outside the state's church at that time, even though they were very, very small numbers if you compare it with now, where there's up to 8, 10, 15% of the people who do not belong to the state church and have another religious affiliations, including Christian affiliations. But at that time, there were under 1% of these people. Jewish, Roman Catholic, Reformed, Baptist, Herrnhuts, people with another affiliation close to the one that the state followed or far away from it. And that's why this became also a big issue while discussing the Constitution. And he was on that, on that lane, following this idea that it is important. And he says something about it also. Already early in 1827, after the inspiration from his trips to England, very, very inspiring trips he had there, it seems like a direct link to a lot of the way he formed his mind after his youth and getting out of his small village. And he say, well, on the freedom of religion, I must immediately admit that the religious force that has found place in Christianity has been a big shame. Not for the Christian faith, but for every Christian humans who had part of it or accepted it. And well, to say, some has today gone so far to say that this persecution and forcing in the matters of belief is a part of the Christianity itself and inseparable from it. But that is just a slander. That is no truth, because the history teach us that people were persecuted and killed for their faith before there was Christians in the world, and that Christians in many centuries, with great power and patience, went against that kind of force and persecution as well. So he's in one way defending and seeing the shame in what has been happening in the past of religious persecution, and he wanted to go around, against that. And here's the front page of his writing on the religious freedom from 1827. It's a very special way to show the text as well, and the old fonts that were used, that kind of Gothic fonts, I guess it's called. And there is his name, NFS Grundtvig. Another issue he also was concerned with was the help for the poor, and he wanted the state to take responsibility for that, so people should not be taken out of that care and left for themselves to deal with a lot of trouble in life. And he has several speeches on that and suggestions when they had this gathering around the Constitution. It was called the Constitution Gathering, the National Gathering for the Constitution in 1848 and 1849, especially 1849. He has a lot to say about these issues. And so the freedom of belief, the freedom of faith, the ability to speak your mind and to choose differently, also to leave your parish and to have the ability to trade, was all something that he really liked and supported. Especially the Baptists had a position to play in his, protests here, because there was a group of Baptists in Denmark and different places. The difference between them and the usual Christian Lutherans are they do not they do not baptize their children as small. They want them to make the choice as grown-ups. But, well, the way of Christianity, especially in his time, and the way they looked at it was, well, you have to be baptized already as a child. And he supported that. He was of the Lutheran Church that wanted to baptize child from the beginning to free them out of the hands of the devil and give them that kind of freedom in living, not becoming human in Christianity. This is also something he was very specific on, that by baptizing, you are not becoming human where you were less human before. You are human by God, by giving this picture and life of the human, but you will become free of the influence of the devil. That's the basic idea in the Christian baptism, to be taken into God's love and light and way of life. And so he could see that the church wanted to force baptize the kids of the Baptists. So that Christian group who had this another approach were forced to send their kids to be baptized because they were living in a country that was like this, and forced them to. And so he joined forces with his old rival, that professor he had a quarrel with and was reason for him to come under censorship in his young days, to get rid of the slavery and to stop forcing that baptism on the Baptist especially. And at one occasion he also defended a Jewish minister, as it's mentioned somewhere, that when a Jewish minister was given a post, and some were rejecting that, saying how can we trust our governing to a Jew. And he had this idea that it's not about his religion or background that's what to look for in a position like this. It is whether he as a person is trustworthy and following his conscience, and is a good person who would reflect the public opinion in a good way. So he could say that, well, you could find a Christian, but would he be more of a better conscience than this guy? So he's like putting another perspective on how to look at things, and people that for the time was still underway. Maybe today, especially in the West, we see this as, oh yeah, that's obvious for many people, but it wasn't at that time. I think we're losing it again, because we are going into times, in my opinion, where things are going more and more towards intolerance. People are, what can you say, not able to keep that tolerance, that open-mindedness for so long. There is something in us that's, I don't know what it is, that makes things intolerable. And so we are back to the track where, freedoms, human rights, what so-called the voice of the people, the democratic ideals, they are heavily under pressure. And maybe we're going different directions. And that's why these wise men had this idea of, especially he, and we had Kierkegaard the same way, saying, do not give up the idea of the king, the one-man rule. This is the most steadfast and safety, what can you say, ground you can have. This is my interpretation, and I like that idea and I support it, that there must be a king and there must be something people can relate to. These parliaments are okay, and this is the voice of the people, and they have to be able to make policies and secure that people do not get stepped on or tyrannically put aside, as some kings had been doing in the past. But, well, it should be like a cooperation between these two instances. This is what was his ideal for the Danes and for Scandinavia and the North. He said, this is the ideal way for us, that we could do so. Yeah, well, it's a long talk, but finally he was also in the picture, somewhere there. Let's see where he is. When they voted for the Constitution in June 1849, that was a very central part of the Danish history. And I don't know, he was pointed out to be sitting somewhere there in the background among these politicians and people who were called in to be part of that gathering assembly. And so part of his time and following the trends, but at the same time, I must also say, I guess he was also concerned with these changes, because in one hand he would like them to be part of the new life, including all these rights and ideas, but also anxious what they could lead to. And he also had many proposals on ways to secure the, the kingdom and secure the people's identity from not being like just torn up between many sides and ideas at that time. So he was really forward minded in many ways if you look at him as that religious person who also built that bridge. This is how I see him primarily. The religious man who, with his great inspiration and spirit, built that bridge to bring his faith with him into the new century and for the people, and also at the same time build up their identity and self-awareness as a nation, as a Danish nation. That's why he's called one of the fathers of the Danish nations, because he really had this great look far, far ahead and very, very far back. He could see the history and thereby understand his time and then look forward to how it's going to be and how to adapt to that, but also how to use it in the service of the faith and the service of the free word and inclusion. So he was basically moving from that small, narrow minded conservative priest to become a global thinker, a global philosopher, a man who has his faith with him and believe in it, orthodoxy and the salvation. He kept writing psalms and he kept showing his passion, but he could see that there is more to it in life that Christianity should not have been, and that's why he tried to combine it with mythology and then try to see it in history how that has affected the nation and how it can be affected again by the voice of the bells of the past and the forefathers that has been shaping the world beforehand, and how he could help shape the new world that's coming. And that's also part of the ideas of the schools that should be built on a different way and idea, as we have talked in the last recording. And so in many ways you can see all these small bridges he's building for the big bridge, in my opinion, to not to change in himself and leave his faith behind, but to take it along with him and to help get it over that bridge to the new century and the new people that's going to receive it. And it actually succeeded, because he and of course many others helped do that, but at the same time also change a lot of those old narrow-minded blackened sights on people and history and the human being as a sinner and a bad person. So all these sides that were more or less negative of the way of looking at humans and life and other cultures and religions, and using the force to uphold one-sided argument, he went also against that. And that's bravery, and that's also what gave him his place as a politician on the scene in Denmark, despite that many of his moralistic ideas and suggestions didn't get through the parliament. There were some other forces taking them in different directions. But so today you can see many politicians, they go back and resound and say, well, we have this idea of liberty and freedom from Grundtvig. And so they try mentioning him, and they can see the inspiration from him as well as the ordinary people who has used his songs and psalms to revive their spirit and the faith in the new century, or looking at his ideas about the schools. They are not really systematic ideas, neither the politicians ones or the school ideas, or any of his other, like even history wasn't all that systematic, even though he wrote a lot about it. But what you can find is that spirit that he's giving you with these few words and these kind of highlightings that he is using to talk about. So he did not formulate a whole school system that the school should be this and that, but he says, well, there are some kind of principal issues that we have to deal with, and out of that we can see that things will take form and take shape according to how they come to be. The idea must be what must be brought to life first, like the baby taken to be like the baby coming to life before you can talk about what size of hat it should wear on its head. You have to bring the idea to life first. And that's what he went about. And the same with his political ideas. You can say, well, he's taking from his time, and he is. But it's also some kind of bravery, because many people were not really in agreement on these ideas and thought that they had to be reactionary to them. They didn't want all this religious freedom and freedom of speech and the big changes in society, but many other people wanted so. And they wanted to be part of this new movement that's swiping the whole of Europe, that changes towards the voice populis and the idea of the sharing the power with the kings and changing the constitution, building a constitution, and having the human rights. That really affected many people, and he also was affected by it in early on, already in the 20s. And that's 25 years before we got to the constitution. It came relatively late in Denmark if you compare it to some other places, but also midway compared to other places that were very, very late changing and had to tame some revolutions, especially in Austria, and France got back on its heels afterwards and chose a new emperor. And so it wasn't so easy looking at the kingdoms around you battling this way of life. And so when he inspired by looking back at the history of the Danes and saying, what's the history of us here? What's the Nordic mythology telling us? What's the Christian spirit saying to us? Combining all that with this very humanistic way of looking at life as well. It's a shared life. You are human first and then Christian. You are part of life as a human who needs to be inspired, enlightened, and go for what you like to do in your life before you become forced to learn and do what others want you to. And in that way, he was building the character of the people as a group, as a community. That's strong. And not the least his poems. I cannot get through his poems, even though I've translated a dozen of them to Arabic, and I want to make them also become songs and maybe help also give a sense of the kind of writing he had in the Arabic world, because it's important between cultures to have this inspiration both ways. And so we can ask ourselves big questions. How much has Europe opened up for that kind of inspiration from other places, and the Middle East that has had these ideas earlier on in their life and also have battled with the same questions, and so they did also in the century that came after. So it's always to have an open mind. That's why I like this side about him. He went to England several times and he got inspired, and didn't just close his mind on the orthodoxy or conservative ways that he was about, but also understood the rationality of things and the practical way of things, and tried to fit in. And at the same time, he had this big project. How do I bring my faith with me inside that new century? Let me use history. Let me sound the bells for our new identity and build that nation's pride and faith once more. So that was a little bit about Grundtvig as a politician, and I think I will continue with him as a Dane, and then go back and maybe make a final talk on all the main issues.